If you're consistently landing on even numbers or 10 reps for your sets, you might be stalling your progress, and I'm going to tell you why.
When we're consistent, we make progress. And when we make progress, we gain momentum. With momentum, consistency is met with less resistance. And before long, we're stronger, fitter, we feel better, and our entire relationship with exercise is different because we're different. We're not people who struggle to exercise anymore. We're people who struggle to imagine our lives without it. I'm Laurel Beversdorf. I help people build strength and endurance in ways they can actually stick to. If you've ever wondered what to focus on, what to ignore, or how to make strength and cardio feel doable with the time, energy, and equipment you have, you're in the right place.
I have noticed this for myself, as well as with my clients. If left to our own devices, we'll probably favor even numbers over odd ones. And these nice even numbers are often written into workout prescriptions as well. You rarely see a prescription to do 3 sets of 9 to 11 reps or 13 to 15 reps in a strength program. It's more likely to be do 3 sets of 6 to 8 or 8 to 10 or 10 to 12. So a rep range where there's a lower number and a higher number. We can call these the floor and the ceiling. And they're often even, or they're often multiples of 5. And so you're trying to get somewhere in there for the reps that you do in a set. And so you base your load selection off of that, right? You pick up a weight that allows you to complete at least the number of reps of the bottom number of the floor, but maybe as many as the ceiling. And you don't want to go too much below or above the floor or the ceiling, right? So, in the middle of this range, though, of maybe 6 to 8 or 8 to 10, there's this odd number, right? Maybe it's 7, maybe it's 9, maybe it's 11. And here's my thought, okay? If folks were targeting what they should be targeting in strength, which we're going to talk about today, they'd probably complete sets of odd numbered reps as often as they'd complete sets of even numbered reps. But I don't see that. And I bet if you look back on your workout performances, if you write them down, which I recommend that you do, you might notice that you too have a preference for even numbers, especially maybe the number 10. That's just a guess, and I have no idea, but it's something for you to investigate. But let's back up. The number of reps that you perform in a set doesn't actually make you stronger. That's right. I'm going to say that again. The number of reps that you perform in a set do not make you stronger. It'd be nice if they did, though. It'd be great if there was this like magic rep number, a guarantee of sorts that, by completing this number of reps, you've done enough. You're going to get stronger. We love that certainty, don't we? It's like cooking with a recipe, which is the only way I cook. I hate the uncertainty of guessing while cooking, because then if the food tastes bad, I don't know why. I don't know. Did I put too much salt in, too much sugar in, too much tomato paste? How much better would it have been if I just let the expert tell me exactly what to do? And that way, if I use a recipe and it still tastes bad, I can just blame that person. And I think we also, especially, we like to know when we're done, right? We like to know when we've done enough of something to make the change we're trying to make. So it'd be so great if we could just know, like, exactly how many reps should I do of this? That would be awesome. But unfortunately, that is not how strength works. The number of reps that you perform in a set is no guarantee that you've gotten stronger. And there's another thing I have to tell you, and this might also rock your world, but neither is the number on the weight. How heavy the weight is also doesn't matter for how strong you get. It really, what it does is it just determines how many reps you'll be able to lift it for, right? A heavier weight, fewer reps, a lighter weight, more reps. So here's the deal. The only thing that really matters for whether or not a set of an exercise signals to your body to get stronger, to make itself stronger, is the effort at the end of the set. And that's what we're talking about in this episode. But yeah, it'd be so nice if getting stronger was more like dental hygiene. Because, since we're cleaning our teeth rather than trying to make them bigger and stronger, the technique of brushing and flossing, the tools we use to brush and floss, how long or thoroughly we brush and floss, this all pretty much stays exactly the same day in and day out for the entirety of our lives. And we know that, okay, if we do it this way every single time, we're probably going to have decent oral hygiene. But the healthy habit of, making our muscles bigger and stronger is just not like brushing and flossing our teeth, because strength training is about making a change to our muscles. It's about making them bigger, making them stronger. And so this adds a layer of complexity, doesn't it? Because the thing we're trying to change should change if we're doing it effectively, right? This thing we're trying to change is changing. It's a moving target. And because of that, our approach to changing it will need to change as well. Stronger muscles, maybe bigger muscles. These are changes that require a weekly habit. For months and years, there needs to be sufficient weekly input. This whole approach, it's got to be adaptable. I think a lot of people sense this. They know that, of course, that muscles aren't teeth, but they get confused about what needs to change. And they're also a little impatient, right? So if we don't see the results we want in a few weeks of exercise, which is the timeline many people expect, but then when it starts to take longer than that, they get a little impatient. After 4 weeks of strength training, they start to feel like, I'm sore some of the time and I'm kind of fatigued from this and I'm a little bored and I have to do these same movements week after week, and they start trying to make a change. But the change they make is they start hopping around. They start hopping around to different programs, formats, exercises. Maybe I'll try Orange Theory. Maybe I'll try CrossFit. Maybe I'll try Pilates. Maybe I'll try yoga. And they're kind of hoping that these new inputs will help them make the changes they're seeking. Or maybe they start hopping around to different exercises, like they see some cool thing on Instagram and they want to do that, and then they see something else and they're like, squirrel, and they want to do that. And a lot of this novelty, I suspect, is sometimes what's holding a lot of people back as well, is they're not actually being consistent enough. And oftentimes it's not just the novelty alone, but also the fact that a lot of the formats that people select to pursue certain specific goals like strength or muscle gains, and this is very true for women, that these formats they choose, like yoga, Pilates, even cardio with weights to a certain extent, walking with a weighted vest, these are often not even remotely close to being the best formats for making the changes they're after, right? Those changes to muscular strength and muscle size. And that change to muscle size is a big part of the body composition changes people are looking for. Like, I don't know very many women who want to get absolutely fucking ripped, but they want to look toned. And that's just another way of saying you want to make your muscles bigger. It might also mean you need to lose a little fat, but maybe that's a conversation for another day. So anyway, people want, whether they realize it or not, they want bigger muscles, and they also want to be stronger. So what is the most important thing they should be focused on? Well, we already established it's not the number of reps you do, and it's not the amount of weight you lift. We already established that it's effort. So that's what we're talking about today. And here's the big win with this. I'm going to give you the big win before I tell you what effort is. And it's this. Effort is free. It does not cost any money to get it. Now, I don't know if you've noticed, but weights are not free. Strength training equipment is not free. Gym memberships are not free. They are way more affordable than a lot of stuff we decide we can spend money on that doesn't further our health very much, but they are not free. Additionally, effort doesn't take up space in your house, unlike those kettlebells, those barbells, that universal machine. Yeah. And also, effort doesn't even require a whole bunch of learning. I mean, you could find it right now if you wanted to, because effort comes from inside and you can explore it anytime you want. And you can get better at targeting the right amount of effort to make a change to your strength. And the only way to do that is trial and error, aka practice. But it's really something we already have. It's inside of us, and we can use it to make ourselves stronger anytime we choose, which I think is so cool. But here's the deal. Effort is the key to ensuring that your sets count. And by count, I mean that they actually send a signal to your body to make itself stronger. Presumably, that is what we're after when we lift weights. When effort is high enough at the end of the set, this ensures that you aren't just going through the motions and wasting your time. It means that the work you're doing isn't just noise, but rather a clear signal to your body that it has to change. And here's what's extra cool. And also maybe a little bit tricky, which is that reps are a number, weight is a number, and numbers are cold, hard facts. But effort is not. Effort is a feeling. Effort is a feeling, y'all. It's vibes, yo. Effort is subjective. And this might be why we don't focus on it as much, or we don't hear about it as much because it's not as easy to write on paper. It's not as easy to standardize. It's not something we can add up, and it's definitely not objective. And we're going to talk about this, but its subjectivity is actually why it's valuable. The feeling of effort is a feeling, okay? And only you can feel it and only you can know it. But effort also mirrors a very real physiological event that's taking place in your body. So when you feel like a set is effortful, something is happening. And here's what's happening. So when you get to the end of a hard set and you feel like this is really hard, here's what's actually happening. So your brain, let's say you're doing bicep curls, okay? Your brain is sending a stronger and stronger signal down to your muscles as you move through the reps of those bicep curls because it has to, because you're getting fatigued. And what that signal does from your brain is it recruits more motor units in the bicep musculature. A motor unit is just a nerve, and then the muscle fibers it controls. So a muscle is made up of many fibers, many motor units. Now, low effort sets where you end the set and you feel like it was pretty easy and you could have done like a bunch more reps. These would mostly use lower threshold motor units, which tend to control smaller, more fatigue-resistant muscle fibers in the muscle. But as your effort climbs, so as the reps slowly tick away and they start to feel harder and you start to slow down probably, you start to get that muscle burning sensation as you get closer to that point where you're not sure you could do many more reps, maybe even one more rep, your brain then has to turn up the dial and your neural drive increases. Those higher threshold motor units get recruited. More of the muscle fibers of the muscle are brought into the game, the big guns. And your perception of effort tracks this process surprisingly well. So as the signal from your brain gets bigger, the sets feel proportionally harder. And that rising feeling of this is getting tough, right, is not random, okay? It actually reflects this increasing demand on your nervous system and the increasing number of fibers being asked to contribute from the musculature. So when you approach the end of a set with only a few reps left in reserve, or maybe no reps left in reserve, but it's hard, right? You've likely recruited most or all of the available motor units for that movement. And that is the signal. That is the stimulus for change. That is the moment your body interprets as the reason to adapt. So the most important number in your set is not 8, 10, or 12. It's how close you are to the point where you could not do another rep. It's how close you are to that point. That's the, we're going to find out number because we can put a number to that, but that's the feeling, okay, that actually determines whether your body gets the message to get stronger. We want to find that high enough effort every set because it's what determines whether or not all the targeted muscle fibers are called on to perform the movement. We want as many of them involved as possible. And here's how that plays out with different loads. So if the weight is heavy, those high threshold motor units, the big ones, get recruited almost immediately. So your brain knows right away, this is a big demand, and it gets those big ones in early. And that's why when you do a heavy set, something 6 reps or fewer, it feels intense. It feels hard from the very first rep, right? You don't need to do a ton more to get that full recruitment. You might have full recruitment from rep number 1 because the load is really forcing that high neural drive right from the get-go. But with moderate loads, these are ones you can lift maybe 7 to 12 times or 7 to 15 times. With moderate loads, it works a little differently. So those early reps are handled mostly by those lower threshold motor units, and they can manage the demand at first. But as those fibers fatigue over the course of the set, they start to tap out, and now your brain has to increase the signal, and the neural drive climbs, and the bigger, higher threshold motor units start to chip in to keep the movement going. And this means that with lighter loads, full recruitment happens later in the set, closer to the point where you feel like you might not be able to do another rep. So if you stop too early before effort feels high enough, you never require those larger motor units to participate. And here's the important part. Okay, again, those higher threshold motor units represent a disproportionately large chunk of your total muscle fibers. They are the majority of the muscle, and they are the fibers with the most potential for strength and size gains. And if they're not being asked to contribute, they have no reason to adapt. So whether the weight is heavy or moderate or light, the rule is kind of the same. You need the set to be hard enough, close enough to your limit, that your brain has no choice but to recruit everything available. That feeling is one of, this is tough, right? I might only be able to do 1 or 2 more reps. And that's not just a feeling, right? So remember, that's the signal. And this is why the most important number in your workout log may not be how many reps you did, and it may not be how much weight you lift. It may be how many reps you had left in the tank. Okay, so let's talk about one way to target effort in this episode. There are 2 main ways people use, and I recorded a YouTube video that walks you through both of these ways with visuals. So if you're someone who wants to see this mapped out, check that out in the show notes. But today we're going to focus on one method, which is RIR. RIR stands for reps in reserve. Reps in reserve is exactly what it sounds like. So at the end of a set, you ask yourself, how many more reps could I have done before I absolutely could not complete another one? And if you finish a set and you think I probably had 2 more in me before I wouldn't be able to do another one, that's RIR2. If you think I maybe had 1 more rep, that's RIR1. And RIR1 feels harder than RIR2 because you got a little closer to that point of not being able to do another rep. That's more fatigue you were experiencing. If you go to try another rep and can't do one at all, that's RIR0, right? You failed. You went to failure. Now let's talk about failure. People don't like this word. They like 10 reps. They hate failure. In strength training, failure is not a bad thing. It's simply a reference point. It's the moment where, despite maximal effort, you cannot complete another repetition. And that reference point is incredibly useful to start to orient ourselves around, because it's basically like knowing your limits, right? Very useful as a human being to know that. I'm still learning mine. Because once you understand where failure is for you, right, in strength training, you can orient your effort relative to it, and you don't have to go all the way there. You don't have to go all the way to failure in your sets. In fact, most of the time you probably shouldn't, but you do want to get close enough that you recruit those high threshold motor units we just talked about. And there are also different types of failure, and I go into this as well a little bit more in detail in the YouTube video, so check it out. But basically there's technical failure where your form breaks down. There's volitional failure where you choose to stop because you don't believe you could complete another rep. It's probably gotten really uncomfortable. And then there's absolute muscular failure where you do try, but you can't because your muscle's simply so exhausted that it cannot produce enough force to lift the weight. All right. So technical failure, form breaks down. Volitional failure, I don't want to do another rep. I don't know if I can, and I really don't want to. And then absolute failure where literally even despite wanting to, you can't. All 3 of these serve as reference points. And in the YouTube video, I tell about, what type you might orient yourself around depending on whether you're lifting free weights or machines, if you're a beginner or not. But the key idea is this: failure is not the goal, it's just the reference point. And RIR is your distance from failure. Like, how far away are you? How many more reps do I have left as the ruler? And you try to land close enough to it at the end of the set to make sure you made a change to your strength. So again, instead of asking how many reps should I do, how much weight should I lift, the better question becomes how many reps should I leave in the tank? And it's often between 1 and 3. Now, what's kind of tricky in the beginning is that unless you go all the way to failure, this reps in reserve idea is basically a guess. It's a hypothetical. You're basically asking, while you perform the set and it's getting really tough, were I to continue, how many more reps would I be able to do? And so you're being asked to make a guess about your capabilities while already experiencing some fatigue and challenge. And so yes, it's subjective because you're making this prediction based on a feeling, but it's also somewhat understandable in a lot of cases to want to default to, yeah, that feels like enough. I think I'm done. And this is where it can become really helpful to be able to draw on your past experiences of being challenged, of being asked to do more under fatigue, to go, no, actually, as much as I would like to stop right now, I actually think I might have a rep or 2 more. So you don't want to stop too soon just to make the discomfort go away, but that's very tempting. You also don't want to do more than you need to because maybe your form will break down and the movement will become inefficient and potentially set you up for injury. Or even if it doesn't, doing more than you need to is also just not the way because it might leave you feeling too fatigued and sore, which can then interfere with future training sessions. Okay, so accumulating fatigue beyond what is necessary to make a change can actually result in a net loss in fitness because you'll need more time to recover which is then time you won't be training. So using RIR prevents you from underdoing it. It also prevents you from overdoing it. And it also takes time to learn. It takes practice. You got to know your body to a certain extent, as I said. So if you have an athletic background or a background as a performance artist, like a dancer of some kind, this can make it so that you pick up on RIR a little faster, perhaps, than someone who doesn't have that background. And the reason for this is that people with these backgrounds tend to have spent considerable amounts of time pushing into effort. Not necessarily in the context of strength training, but in the context of exercise. They're pushing their physical limits. They're trying to make changes to their performance, right? They've gotten used to some extent, sacrificing physical comfort to make these changes to their performance because they're chasing an outcome, right? At the end of the day, it might be to win or to get better at the movement or to do it faster, higher, to better their competitor in some way. So even if you don't have this athletic background, finding this limit of reps in reserve can take a little bit more time, even if you aren't new to exercise, because we don't have to, for example, in some forms of exercise, yoga, cardio even, we don't have to get as close to our limit for the exercise to benefit us as we do in strength training. Moderate effort cardio will increase your aerobic capacity over time, and moderate cardio should feel pretty far, like much farther away from your limit than, say, vigorous cardio or, say, strength training close to failure does, right? Effort at the end of your strength sets should feel some shade of hard, right? So for many, the feeling of really, truly challenging yourself in strength can take some time to get used to. It can be very new, and that's on top of the new movements, the new equipment, the new routine, the new jargon, right? And so there's a lot to learn. And so like all of these other new things, it can take time to explore these new feelings of effort and also fatigue, not only for what they signal about whether or not you've done enough in a set to make a change to your strength, but also what they show you and teach you about yourself, or what they signal to you about who you are becoming, right? Somebody who willfully on a weekly basis steps into this intensity on purpose to get stronger. But effort should be your primary focus, and you should be seeking to find that appropriate amount of effort at the end of every set, and you'll continue to do that over many weeks and months. And as you do, if your effort is high enough at the end of those sets, you're going to notice that the number of reps you can perform of an exercise at a given load starts to increase. And as you're able to increase the number of reps you perform, you're still targeting that same level of effort. You're still leaving 2 in reserve. But now instead of being able to do 10 reps, you can do 14. But if you're constantly getting to 10 and it's starting to feel a little hard and you're stopping, when you really could have done 14 with 2 reps in reserve, right? You might be leaving quite a few stimulating change-making reps on the table, and that might be stalling your progress. And you don't want to do that, because after you're no longer a beginner, the beginners get the newbie gains of being able to lift many more reps week to week of a given exercise, or they even get to pick up heavier weights week after week in that same exercise. Like virtually every single week, they're making some kind of really big jump. But that honeymoon of being new to strength training, it ends. It ends eventually. And strength then starts to stall out a bit more. It becomes harder to make changes. So as an intermediate and experienced lifter, strength is won in these small single rep increases across 3 sets week after week, right? So I get really excited when I've been doing about 20 total pull-ups across 3 sets at the gym. And then one week, everything else being equal, I do 21. That's a 5% increase in reps, which is a big deal for me at this point. So another thing I've been hinting at here is that the subjectivity of RIR, it might not give us this feeling of certainty or completion, but it is its biggest strength, not its weakness, that it's subjective. Because the fact of the matter is that we are not the same every day and every week. Our strength is a moving target, but also what we can handle week to week is a moving target as well. So presumably, we're getting stronger week to week from strength training, but also as humans, we are always dealing with random shit in our lives. Our body's always different, tired, 1 week, well-rested another, sick 1 week, healthy another, stressed 1 week, carefree another, busy 1 week, on vacation another. All of this on any given day during any given workout will also play a role in how hard our sets feel. So we really shouldn't be striving for this fixed outcome. We shouldn't expect to hit a certain number. We should probably go in with a bit more of an open mind and just focus on RIR. Now, not to say we should have no idea how much weight to pick up in an exercise or no idea how many reps we can do. This is why I think it's helpful to write that stuff down and look back on it when you go to work out. Like, what did you do last week? That's probably a really good place to start this week, right? But don't expect to be able to do as much as you did last week. Likewise, don't expect to only be able to do what you did last week. Instead, start the set and see where it takes you and finish it with the target reps in reserve. But we need that subjectivity because it's the way that we know that hard enough was hard enough on any given day, depending on what we're dealing with. How effortful the set feels at the end is what sends the signal to the muscle to adapt. So it's really important. In fact, it's far more important than it gets attention for. And we often think that it's how many reps should I do, the weight, how much weight should we lift, that's important. In reality, how effortful the set feels at the end is the most important, which this is also good news because we can reach an effort level of RIR 1, 2, or 3 in a wide range of ways. We can use a wide range of weights and a wide range of reps to get there. If we use lighter weights, we're going to do more reps. If we use heavier weights, we're going to do fewer reps. But there are many roads to RIR Rome, folks. Now, these choices of whether to lift light weights for many reps or heavy weights for fewer reps are not exactly the same. And I get into a few reasons why you might select lighter versus heavier weights in the YouTube video. But just know that far more important than the reps and number on the weight is effort. You really can't get stronger if your sets aren't effortful enough. So in my personal training software that I use with my asynchronous clients, when they go to train, they see couple things. They see the exercise demo, they see the number of sets to do, they see the target level of effort always, which is usually also a range. For the isolation exercises, those single joint exercises that work smaller masses of muscle, it's usually RIR 0 to 1 or 1 to 2. Whereas for the compound lifts that involve bigger masses of muscle, multiple joints moving, those are the squats, the deadlifts, the push-ups, the presses, the rows, things like that, their RIR might be something more like 2 to 3. Now, there's also some instructions given to the client based on what they specifically need to focus on. But past that, after all of that, they'll either see one of two prescriptions. I'll either tell them how much weight to lift in the exercise, for example, 25 pounds, or I'll tell them a rep range to target, for example, 4 to 6, 6 to 8, 8 to 10, 10 to 15. But at any rate, I don't tell them both. I don't tell them the weight and the reps because that wouldn't allow them room to auto-regulate, to target effort, right? Targeting effort is just another way to say auto-regulate, self-regulate, subjectively determine, right, at the end of the set, how much was this amount of effort for you. If I tell them how many reps to do and how much weight to lift, it locks them in too much. Like if I have to lift exactly this amount of weight for this narrow number of reps, where is the space to adjust based on how effortful it feels, given everything I've got going on, right? So this overly rigid prescription might mean that they would miss the mark on how hard the set should feel. It might feel too easy. It might feel too hard, right? So I don't tell them both weight and reps, which means that they have to solve for X, right? And they're doing that by feeling their way through effort as the set goes on. And when they hit that target effort at the end of the set, say it's RIR 2, they stop, they write down the weight they lifted and those number of reps they lifted for the set. And so when I start to see, and I inevitably do, right? When I start to see lots of 3 sets of 10 across the board on most exercises with my clients, I can be somewhat confident as their coach that in many cases, they probably aren't focusing as much on effort as they could. Not always, for sure. But in many cases, I can reasonably start to suspect that the first set of these exercises that they're doing was likely underloaded, okay, which doesn't mean that the weight they selected was too light, which is what I think we think when we hear load. We think, oh, they lifted too light of a weight. No, rather in this case, underloading means they were under-efforting at the end of the set, meaning that first set might not have been taken close enough to failure, okay, when all 3 sets are 3 sets of 10 or 3 sets of 8 or 3 sets of 12. Because when you take that first set close enough to failure, not always, but usually we see a drop in reps across the remaining sets because the musculature has become fatigued from that earlier set, especially that first set. And that fatigue starts to spill into performance of the later sets. So there's a 2024 meta-analysis by Nuzzo that looked at this, and here's what it found. Nuzzo's 2024 analysis looked at data that had already been collected in 29 studies where people did 4 to 6 sets of the same exercise at the same relative load, resting in between, and they took every single set all the way to failure. God bless those people. That must have been uncomfortable. Now, this is important to remember. These people were going all the way to failure. Okay, so not terribly realistic to real life, but we'll talk about that later. So across these studies, the rep drop between the first set, second set, third set, and on was often not linear. It was steepest from set 1 to 2, which means that set 1 created the most amount of fatigue, and then it flattened out in a plateau pattern. So on average, people got about 70% as many reps in set 2 as they got in set 1, and then about 55% in set 3 as set 1, and 50% in set 4 than set 1, and then 45% in set 5 and 6. Now, longer rest between sets reduced how much reps fell, but overall, the curve in the pattern still showed up. So 2 important things about this. 1, as I said, these were sets taken to failure, so we cannot directly apply those exact percentages to training, right? We can't expect our second set to be 70% less than our first set if we're leaving 2 or 3 reps in reserve because you're not accumulating as much fatigue when you leave 2 or 3 reps in reserve. So you're not going to see the drop-off. The drop-off is probably going to be smaller. 2, the author is very clear that the chart is a general educational tool and it does not account for the type of exercise they were doing, the type of load, and the rest interval. But here's the practical coaching takeaway that does apply. If your first set is truly hard enough, it will often, not always, but it will often create enough fatigue that later sets hit the same target of effort, but with fewer reps, even if you rest appropriately. So if you're seeing 10, 10, 10 over and over across multiple sets, across multiple exercises, it doesn't prove anything is wrong, but it is a reasonable clue that your first set may have been under-efforted. Now, again, some nuances in order. For heavier sets, ones where we're lifting heavier weights, right? We're probably going to stay a little further away from failure for those. Typically, it's RIR 2-3, not 1-2. And if reps do stay the same across those sets, this is less likely to be a sign that you are not targeting effort, because what might be changing instead as fatigue builds is the RIR, right? So if you have a range of RIR 2 to 3 in a compound lift and you're doing 5 reps, okay, that's a heavy lift. The first set might be 5 reps, RIR 3. You could have done 3 more, you stopped, and that was enough. You got close enough to failure to make a change. The second set of 5 might have been RIR 2. Right? You're more fatigued from the first set. So now you have fewer reps in reserve. Still enough to make a change. The last set might have been 5 reps RIR 1. That one felt the hardest. That last set felt the hardest. And again, it was enough to make a change, obviously. For isolation exercises like bicep curls, calf raises, knee extensions, hamstring curls, these are single joint exercises often that work a smaller mass of muscles. If reps are the same across all 3 sets, that, in my opinion, is a little bit more sus. Because for those, we're probably only trying to leave 1, maybe 2 reps in reserve, sometimes 0. So if the reps are the same across all 3 sets, I really start to suspect, and this is after a while, not right away in the beginning of working with a new client, but after, several months of working with that client, I start to suspect that the first set was underloaded a bit because you should have ended it with one RIR, which can create considerable fatigue for those remaining sets. Now, I said that I don't really worry about this too much in the beginning because for the first couple months of strength training, if someone's new to strength training, I work with a lot of people who are new to strength training. They're really just learning how to strength train, right? So we don't want actually the sets to feel terribly hard at the end. And even leaving like 5 reps in reserve for a beginner can be enough as well, right? We don't need to get as close to failure because the stimulus is so new. Your body is listening. Like it is just so sensitive to this new input that I often joke with my new clients, you could get stronger by looking at a weight. Of course, that's not true, but you get the point. It's with my more intermediate, well-trained clients that I start to become a little suspicious about these always, 3 sets of 8, 3 sets of 10, 3 sets of some even number usually. So again, 3 sets of 10 or 3 sets of some even number is not a guarantee you're underloading, but if it's always or usually 3 sets of 10 and you've been lifting for a few months purely from a probability perspective, it's just not likely that your rep performance in each set for each exercise would be consistently even numbers or consistently 10 if you were really targeting RIR because there's just too much variation to you week to week, right? You are more different than that week to week. Your strength is probably more different than that week to week. So if you're really targeting RIR, there would be much more variation in reps across exercises. There'd probably be as many odd numbers as even numbers, but there'd also be more rep variation across the sets. The last set would frequently, not always, but frequently be less reps than the first. Okay. So to wrap up this episode and leave you with an idea you can apply immediately in your training, which hopefully you already have, right? You're going to now go strength train and target effort in all your sets, right? Not the reps written down, right? But to wrap up this episode, I'm going to share a truly terrible analogy with you and brace yourself because it involves Love is Blind on Netflix. So every season I tell myself I won't watch Love is Blind. Every season I say, don't do it. And then I make the mistake of watching the first episode and I get hooked. I become invested. I got to see how it ends. And every season I'm annoyed, of course, at the end because most of it's so clearly manufactured. It probably takes longer than a few days to decide if you're going to marry someone. Shocking, I know. But if you don't know the show, people date on this show through a wall without seeing each other. They form connections. They, quote, fall in love. They get engaged, sight unseen. Love is blind, right? And only later do they decide at the altar. Yes, the season ends at the altar. It's really fucked up. But only later at the altar do they decide if they're actually going to go through with it, which is just, it's awful. But I continue to watch it. And here's the part where I make this an analogy for you. So on that show, people are trying to assess something they cannot fully see. They don't have perfect information. They can't rely on obvious external cues. So they have to listen inward. They have to ask, how does this feel? Is this strong enough of a feeling? Is this real? And they often get it wrong. The skill they're attempting is the one I want you to practice in your training. So you cannot see your motor units. You cannot measure your neural drive mid-set. You cannot know with certainty how many more reps you truly have unless you test it and go all the way. So you really have to tune in. You have to listen. You have to listen to your body. You have to ask while you're doing these reps, while the set is getting tough, is this close enough to my limit? How many more reps could I do? And unlike Love is Blind, this is a skill, not a spectacle. So that means that you're going to get better at it. It actually does work, unlike Love is Blind, and it ensures that you'll make the changes you're trying to make with strength training if you really tune in and focus on this feeling. So here's what I want you to do with your training, okay? And it's a little bit like pretending you're on Love is Blind. When you start your set, instead of looking for that perfect 10, get it? You're going to treat each set like you're in the pods and you can't see yet what you're dealing with. There's a wall between you and the number of reps you'll complete. And so to discover your current level of strength on that day, you're going to let go of what you've done in the past. You're going to let go of what you expect for yourself in the future. And instead, you're going to invest in the present moment. You're going to invest in the process. You're going to let yourself have a feeling and you're going to rep it out and you're going to get to know your effort levels. So you're not in there looking for that perfect 10. That is not what this is about. Love is blind. That is not what you came to do. You came to match your strength to the reps you can perform that day. You came to find the feeling of effort at the end. And as the reps tick away and as the weight starts to feel harder to lift, as your tempo slows down, as the reps get a little grindy, as fatigue builds, you listen in and you ask yourself, how many more reps do I have left? Is this the one? Now, eventually it will become unbearable, and that's when you have to stop. And then comes the reveal. Maybe you did 7 reps, maybe 13 reps, maybe 17, maybe 9. It probably wasn't a perfect 10, but hey, maybe it was. But you didn't do it for the number. You did it for the effort. That journey through fatigue, those change-making reps, that journey to strength. Okay, my terrible analogy is over. I'll leave you with this. Effort is key. Effort is key to changing your strength, my friends. And this is great news because it's free. It doesn't take up space in your house, and everyone can explore it at any time. Effort, high effort, is what tells your body, hey body, this current level of strength, it got you through this set, but it's not going to cut it. You're going to need to make a change to this current level of strength, this current size of the muscle. It's going to need to go up because this is what we do now. We do hard things. Now, will targeting effort mean you do more reps of a given load week in and week out forever? No. Maybe it will while you're a beginner, but eventually that progress will slow down. Gains as an intermediate and advanced lifter are just not as thrilling, but they happen. And they are won in these tiny increases week to week, where you maybe did 1 extra rep across 3 sets this week versus last week. So it's important that if you have that 11th rep, do it. Don't settle for 10. Thank you for joining me for another episode of the Practical Fitness Podcast. And thanks to the 3 of you who have left a rating. And thank you to Katie at 60 who left me a written review. Katie, in her review, has requested that I talk about the importance of breathing patterns in strength training. So I've made a note of that for a future episode. Thank you all very much for listening, and I'll see you in 2 weeks.